Chapter 2. All Hail the Machines. Emmett always had a way with horses. He was born in the slums, and he'd had his heart broken many times. His father was dead, and no one ever told him why. His memory of growing up was painful. He'd aged rapidly, and with good fortune, he and his mother were able to prevent each other's starvation. In his teenage years, he had swindled his way into the world of the upper class as a horse groomer and jockey. He developed a casual relationship with the stables. It made him crazy when the horses would lose races and be put down. Emmett was a full-grown man by the time Hephaestus reached out to him. He was in the stables after a race, raking out old hay and talking soothingly to the tired animals. "Your name is Emmett?" she had said. That was the first time he didn't want his name to be that. The way she said his name gave him goosebumps. He reluctantly leaned his shovel against the wall and side-eyed her. A woman in a crisp blouse, long gelled hair slicked back like an alien, sunglasses, and black coal lipstick. "Yes, I heard you were the best." Emmett suddenly felt nauseous. He didn't know who the woman was, and he didn't want to. He was good at reading people, and he was afraid of this person. "The best at what, ma'am?" Hephaestus half sneered, which, as we know, was a big deal. It was almost like a half smile. The way she walked was like floating. She kept getting closer and closer, and then, when she was up in front of Emmett, she smelled to him like decaying figs. "The best at what I need you for." Her sunglasses were so dark that Emmett could not imagine anyone being able to see through them. He felt cold and paralyzed. Her presence immobilized him. But still, he was able to pivot and go back to shoveling the hay. The horses in the stables were uncomfortable. They were kicking and breathing hard. The presence of this woman concerned them, and that was enough for Emmett not to trust this newcomer. "Do you know who I am, Emmett?" Hephaestus asked. "No, ma'am." Hephaestus presented a rare, full sneer. "Well, I am your new god," she said. "I am the one who has engineered the lives of the humans that allowed a worm like you to crawl so close to the upper class. You should kiss my hand. But because you smell so bad, I would recommend you keep as far away from me as possible." Emmett cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if you don't mind, who the fuck do you think you are?" Back to the regular sneer. "Come with me and I'll show you." "Please, I really need to finish my work here," Emmett said. Hephaestus loved that. She waved her hand like nothing was wrong. "Oh, no, you're going to want to see this. Come with me, my child." And he did. They went out from the barn into the pen where only one horse was still grazing. She was a mare whom Emmett had named Moonshine. She was brown and had white spots. She was wild in her soul, but he'd tamed her over the years. Now the only wildness left in her was to stay out in the field a little bit longer after the other horses. Emmett loved watching Moonshine run. When she saw them come out, all four of her legs stiffened, and she let out a soft, fearful sound. "Shh, shh, shh," Emmett said, hurrying to console her. Hephaestus chuckled. "I'd stand clear if I were you." Emmett spun around, bewildered. "I don't know who you think you are, but..." And just then the Bastet appeared. It had leapt, as cats do, from out of nowhere, and then suddenly right into the pen. An enormous mechanical monster, towering 3 stories tall, that moved and acted like a cat, but at the same time emitted no signs of life force. Emmett, a master of animals, could immediately tell that this was no animal. It was only a monster. It stood in front of him and Moonshine and Hephaestus, awaiting orders. Moonshine kicked backwards, and finding nothing to kick, she launched into a gallop. Almost bored, the Bastet lazily turned its head to follow the horse as it ran frantically around the pen. "Hey, lady," Emmett shouted. "I don't know who you are, but please don't hurt us. We did nothing wrong." Hephaestus reached out, one hand to her face and pulled her sunglasses onto her greasy head. She rubbed her old eyes and sighed. It's not about you doing anything wrong, child. It's about you not doing anything wrong later after I own you. Then she snapped her fingers, and the nightmare began. The Bastet responded before the echo of the snap was through. It pivoted, dragon eyes dilated, and sprang. No! Emmett screamed, and he ran forward too, but the distance between a single leap of the Bastet and the head start that Moonshine had was no match for him. The Bastet fell from the sky and landed exactly in front of the horse. In Emmett's memory, the expression on the Bastet's face was exactly the one that he remembered when he thought of Hephaestus. As the machine cat effortlessly scruffed the nape of the horse and pulled it into the sky, Emmett tripped over himself in the sand and spiraled backwards, suddenly deciding to kill this woman. Hephaestus was standing there, watching him. Her sunglasses were back on, and she was casually taking out her flask and having a pull. Meanwhile, the horse was dangling from the Bastet's mouth, perhaps 30 feet in the air. The cat's vertical lizard-slit eyes were moving back and forth, calculating the distance between Emmett and Hephaestus. The Bastet decided the danger was minimal. It bowed its head and flexed its front arms, and then did a little push-up and let go with its jaws and flung the horse into the sky. Moonshine went up, still alive and neighing, and this was the longest 3 seconds of Emmett's life. Moonshine's body came down, screaming, and crunched into the sand with the sound of broken leaves. The sand and excess smoke of the machine rose up, probably for the best. The mangled beast was dead as anything had ever been. Emmett was devastated, and the Bastet had already resumed its position, awaiting orders. Emmett was just standing there, dumbfounded. He had completely forgotten who he'd been planning on killing just half a minute ago. Hephaestus came up behind him. Her face had gone back into the old frigid bitch that she was. So I've decided to use you, Hephaestus said. And if you fuck around, I'll have my machines mangle your mother. Do you understand? Whack. By the time he was 18, Seteth had learned 2 things: how to fish and how to take a beating. The latter had been instilled about a year ago when he was living along the Nile River, down by the ghettos, but not too far from the piers and the ocean docks. He'd been earning his daily meal as a crab fisherman, having learned to tie together traps mostly made of papyrus. It was hard work waking up well before dawn to get to the good spots first, and the good spots were coveted. Some of the first true moments of Seteth's budding adulthood were burned into him by the turf wars with old, weathered crab farmers. They terrorized him and tried to push him away from the shores. But Seth was fortunate and a relatively good fisherman, especially for his lack of experience, and he won the favor of a couple of market men early on. His place in the marketplace itself stabilized over the years as he caught the eyes of several traders who worked the lands around that area of the sea. It was back in the shanty town where he had set up his tent that he was really in danger. Ironic, too, that he had been saving money and was close to buying his own room in one of the neighboring towns, that the police came to berate him when they did. Bad timing is what had happened. The first thing that came was a gush of water from the fire hoses. Seth's little paper tent was folded instantly, and he scrambled out of it, gasping for breath. There was a team outside of the tents wielding a massive hose connected to the fire hydrant. They were just blasting the tents one at a time, and everyone was getting out, rubbing their eyes and yelling. In his youth, Seteth was fired up and eager to approach the officers. There were 4 men in total, in traditional police uniforms, black padded armor, gold chainmail, and either clubs or scimitars on their hips. "Hey, I'm trying to sleep," Seteth shouted, half wet from the hose. Whack. Seteth saw stars. One of the policemen had his club out and had swung it fast into Seth's head. The others had the gall to chuckle as the boy went down into the sand, but Seth got back up. "I'm not fighting against you, I'm simply..." Whack. Another policeman this time. And now, the whole crew was laughing. Seth reeled backwards, this time still on his feet. He could see the crowd around him falling back into their own tents, wanting nothing to do with him. He thought of all the old crab fishermen jeering, egging on the policemen. He couldn't handle it. He went back for more. "Hey, yeah, you, hey!" He swung at the first man who had struck him. The policeman weaved and pulled his arms back with the big bat. Seth bounced back this time, narrowly avoiding the downward blow. But immediately, the other men were behind him, grabbing at his arms. Seth wriggled free and swung again, this time landing a solid connection with the first guy's jaw. The crowd cheered. Suddenly, he had their attention. The police fanned out, tending to the crowd, making a circle around Seth and the first armored cop. The policeman was angry now. He pulled back and swung back and forth with that bat almost frantically. Seth ducked under the horizontal swinging, and he plunged his right shoulder into the man's thigh, lifting him up off his feet. There was a moment of silence as the man came up off the ground, over Seth's shoulder. And for one glorious moment, it was as if the boy was winning the fight, and the man he'd picked up flopped backwards over his shoulder and down into the sand. Seth spun around to snatch the bat. Snap. On his shoulder. Seth felt it all at once. His collarbone had been disconnected. Another cop pulled free from the raging crowd and grabbed him from the back, twisting his arms. He felt the bone of his collarbone stick out of his shoulder, and he cried out. They kicked his knees. The crowd jeered. More water. Suddenly, the hose was on Seth, and he was down on his knees with all the policemen around him, hitting him in the face. But the face didn't hurt as much as the shoulder. They pulled him and prodded him, and all the while his bone was whirling freely out of its socket, splintered by the collision. Still held down by two of the policemen, Seth could see the first man who had struck him stand up and pull his arms back one final time. "And this," he said to the crowd, "is why you respect the police." Whack. Seth felt blood flow out of his head, and his cheek hit the gritty sand. As he lost consciousness, he saw one of the traders he'd worked with for the past year. He recognized him barely, but the look of concern was enough to lock eyes with. He tried to think of the man's name as his vision went blurry. The last thing he remembered was the cops laughing again and getting the hose ready to spray the rest of the tents. The bountiful land that is dead to me now. 1 year later, the trader Ilian was visited by a messenger from Byblos. A messenger who represented some wealthy family planning a great wedding feast was interested in Ilian's reputation regarding semi-decent, or as they put it, fine wines. Instead of complying with the messenger's request to retrieve a sample of wine, Ilian told the messenger that he would make the 3-day journey back with him, bringing samples from several vineyards and also a selection of olives and cured meats. The messenger, who had to do other things, agreed to divulge the location of this Egyptian palace and gave them a little note to get them inside the walls of the estate. Excited about the prospect of a deal that could make him rich, Ilian woke up his newfound apprentice, whom he was growing so fond of. The boy, who had been sleeping in the shed until far beyond dawn, wriggled in his sleeping bag. "Go to the market and gather provisions for both of us to travel for 6 days, he said while Seth rubbed his eyes, stinking of sweat and cheap beer. "Then prepare 2 horses. Fortune is calling." After, mostly for the benefit of his own excitement, Ilian added, "Have you ever been inside the walls of Byblos, kid?" Seth only blinked up at him, rubbing at his shoulder that had never healed quite as it should have. Feeling the odd combination of pity and admiration that the boy always made him feel, Ilian changed his tone. You feel free to wash up in my house first, but don't take too long. You don't want to live in my shed forever, do you? Content with that, Ilian went back towards the house, jangling the keys to the wine cellar. Oh, if this were the big fish he'd been waiting for all year, he would gladly use all of the charm at his disposal to reel it in. He opened the creaky cellar doors and lit a lantern. He wrestled the door shut behind him just before a gust of wind blew the sand and dust to scrape against the outside of the barrier. None of that needed to get into his stash. These were wines better suited for drinking at a wedding than sitting around getting buried in the desert. The haves and the have-nots. The first 2 days of the journey came with a strange aura around the boy. To Ilian, it was important for a man to respect the privacy of another man's past, especially one who had lived on the streets. But the closer they got to Byblos, the more tense this Seteth appeared. He kept even more to himself, and he watched the great pyramid skyline approach with narrow eyes. It was clear that the boy didn't trust the city, but Ilian did not know why. As for himself, the trader spent his life in the shadow of Byblos. To be rich enough to live within those walls was a dream of his throughout his early career. Now he viewed the rich landowners more like targets, ignorant in their lethargic wealth. The Egyptians were always worried about giving away crumbs of their amassed fortunes, but not enough to actually live among the commoners and investigate what merits a good product. It was Ilian's job to sell a good product, and wine was his product of choice. Ilian was a liaison between the up-and-coming winemakers in the ghettos and the rich connoisseurs in the city. It's getting dark. Let's find someplace flat to set up camp. Tomorrow we can get there before noon if it's not too far into the walls. The boy grunted and soothed his horse. They'd been moving north up the Nile, and now they could see the flashing neon pyramid lights already raging against the setting sun, forming an unnatural halo around the skyline. Where are we going exactly? Asked the boy. Some big-time landowners, Ilian shrugged, and then, in a mock fancy accent, Lord Mesmer, or something like that. The boy's jaw clenched, and he rubbed his shoulder again. It seemed like that was a nervous tic he'd developed. Ilian imagined Seth had created his own kind of hatred towards the super-wealthy city. He couldn't blame him for it. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. Such was the purpose of the walls around Egypt in the first place. Take the horses and bring back some water, Ilian commanded. I'll unload the wagon and start a fire. Seth dismounted and took the luggage from the horses' backs. By the time he'd returned with a full bucket of water, Ilian already had a small spark for the fire. If we make it big tomorrow, we can share some of the meat we brought to sell. They came from the best vendors in Byblos, Ilian said. I would appreciate that, Seteth said dully. What's the matter with you, kid? You'd think I was taking you to the gallows. Seth was silent. He lit a torch and started setting up the tent. You hate them, don't you? Ilian said. At that, the boy stiffened up and looked fearful, like he'd been caught doing something bad. Who? Egyptians. The upper class. The wall dwellers. It's all right. You don't have to be worried about it. I don't think too highly of the wall. No pun intended. It's a social nightmare. Class division and all that. Oh, yes. Well, I do hate them, Seteth said quietly, going back to work on the tent. With that, the fear in his posture shifted, and Ilian felt a slight chill in how coldly the boy had said it. He was telling the truth. I know what it's like to have nothing, Ilian said. Oh. Yeah, my dad was, well, I have other siblings, and there wasn't always dinner on the table. I get it. It sucks. Seth nodded. But, Ilian went on, tomorrow we are going into their town, and we're going to take their money. You'll see. It's all about knowing what we have that they want. I can teach you that. Seth finished setting up the tent and looked into the fire. He looked a little older to Ilian at that moment. Shared hatred can do that. It can bring unity in a way. At the very least, it levels the playing field. Ilian took out his tobacco pouch and rolled 2 cigarettes. The boy coughed when he smoked it, but he smoked the whole thing. Gifts for Mother. Setheth lay under his blanket until Ilian was asleep. He crept away from the campsite and walked across the desert. Further north, along the Nile towards the moon, he could see the city growing larger in the distance. The city where he grew up. The city that he'd escaped when he was 16 just a few years ago. Did he want to go back? Maybe. But who wouldn't? He wanted to see his mother and his sister. Seth walked across the dunes in his sandals, scanning the ground for scorpions. The moon was directly in front of him, bright enough that his vision was a little obstructed, and he kept his gaze on his feet. But then something caught his eye. A little red plant that he'd recognized from his mother's bookshelf, from when she was studying rare succulents around him. He plucked it and put it in his pouch. What luck. He knew that Ilian would know how to sell such a thing. But part of him was hoping he could put it to use. After all these years, he wanted to give his mother a gift. Setheth wondered if there were any more of the little rare shrubs. He remembered her saying they often grew in groups, in cold, dark places in the desert. So he followed the river along the shadowy walkway to the side of the tall dunes. Sure enough, after some time he came to a little cave in the dunes, and he climbed inside. The moon was so bright he could see the cave open up deeper than his eyes could see. He scanned the ground for more of the succulents until everything went dark. Something had moved in front of the entrance. Startled, Seth turned around and blinked towards the open mouth of the small cave. He was about 10 feet inside, and he hadn't heard anything outside, but the entrance was suddenly closed, and it was as if somebody had simply turned the lights off. All he could hear was the Nile River outside of the cave and a steady drip, 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 coming from somewhere in front of him. It was calm, but he was uneasy. He squinted towards the entrance, trying to make out what had blocked him in. And then it happened. The entirety of the cave lit up in a red glow, and at the center, Seth could see the immediately recognizable mechanical cat eye. It was a Bastet. He could hear his mother's voice as plain as if it were yesterday. Setheth, you must hide from the Bastets. You have to understand. The Bastets will hurt you. His throat ran dry. He could hear the blood in his ears. It had been years, and he'd never even come close to one. And now, when he was miles away from home, it had been silent until that moment. Then there came a terrible sound. No meow here. An ear-splitting siren cut through the night and echoed into the cave. The oddest thoughts were going through Setheth's mind. I don't want Ilian to know I'm marked. But he had larger problems. He could see the face of the giant cat pull backward, and in almost slow motion, the entire body of the beast, which lifted a single paw. It reared on hind legs and swatted down, knocking sand and dust into the entrance of the cave. The collapsing stones sounded like thunder, and the creature's flashing red eyes gave a strobe effect to the already terrifying situation. Seth retreated frantically until he felt stone-cold cave wall behind his back. There was still a long tunnel between him and the Bastet, but the enormous cat monster was now pawing at the cave entrance. More sand and stone cascaded down, and the moonlight was growing dimmer. The slushing sound of the cascading gravel filled the tunnel. Sirens still blaring, Seteth could hear the cat scratching away at the mouth of the cave, but it had sealed it completely, and Seth was in the dark. He could still hear the scraping and the screeching siren, but his vision was completely cut off. And by now, the cat had dug far enough in that the dirt and sand were falling onto Seteth and covering him. With no way to subdue them, the memories of Seth's first night in the crypt came flooding back to him. He felt like a vice was clenching down on his chest, forcing out his breath. He felt trapped between the walls and the ceilings and the floors. He felt contained beneath all the sand and dirt, and he wanted to scream. So he did. Against the blaring siren, against the avalanche of falling dirt, he screamed and screamed. The cat kept pawing at the dirt, setting off the avalanche, and knocking more and more dirt down to bury the young man. Seteth eventually had to stop screaming as the dirt was getting into his mouth. He twisted his body around and started digging too, just hoping to find an air pocket. And he did. By some miracle, grab hold of a small boulder, which he was able to pull away and reveal a hole small enough to fit his body through. He wiggled in there and started crawling forward. The Bastet persisted, and Seth could hear the tunnel collapsing behind him. He hurried as quickly as he could down into the cave until he could barely hear the siren. That was better. He kept going, and was relieved when the tunnel began to widen enough for him to crouch. With loose dirt in his hair and all over his sweaty body, he coughed and gagged, but kept moving forward. The tunnel widened all the way out into a bigger cave, and there was even a bit of moonlight shining from somewhere. The ground was damp, and Seth could hear another river nearby. He followed that sound until, sure enough, he came to a little underground stream. Gladly, he plunged his hands into it and began wiping the dirt off his face and body. He was deep into the cave now, and he couldn't hear the Bastet digging anymore, but it certainly was, and that petrified him for a moment. But then he kept moving along the riverside, following the moonlight. Finally, he found the mouth of the cave where the river was trickling in from the desert outside. He poked his head outside gingerly and looked around like a meerkat. Now he could see the Bastet 100 yards away, not digging with such ferocity anymore, but rather it was pawing curiously at the ground. The siren had turned off, and the blinking red cat eyes were just scanning back and forth. Seteth pulled his body through the hole and climbed out into the sand. Exhausted, he watched the Bastet in fear and slowly backed away, still following the river. In the moonlight, Seth saw the cat's eyes glow dimmer and darker until he could barely see them. A loudspeaker from within the machine's body blared through the desert. Suspect terminated. Initialize roaming sequence. And there was a loud clicking noise. The Bastet leaned coolly back into all fours and turned around to walk up the nearest hill. Suddenly, it was back in its original form, looking less like a monster and more like a mechanical pet just going for a walk. But Seteth knew better. Just okay. The commotion awoke Ilian with a start. He sprang up and rushed over to calm the horses. They were tied tightly, but it wasn't good for them to thrash around with the ropes on their necks. He gave them apples and rubbed their heads soothingly. The boy was nowhere in sight. Curious. To Ilian, the sirens in the moonlight reminded him of his past. When he was living on the street, he would sleep with one eye open and wake to such a sound, with the police kicking down the doors of the squatter houses or blasting hoses on their tents. These were not pleasant memories. Rather, he'd buried them away years ago. In fact, he was around Seteth's age, just approaching 18, when he went straight up until that point had been a blur of drugs and grifting for his food. When he'd learned to work the docks and fish for food, his life had taken a turn. This was part of the reason he had taken a fondness for Seteth, who was clearly running from his past as well. After the horses were soothed, Ilian took a flashlight, put on a jacket, and headed towards the siren. He liked to believe in his maturity that he knew better than to poke around with the police activity, but he was worried about Seteth. It was cold that night, but the moon was clear enough beacon, one that he imagined the boy following on a midnight stroll. Ilian walked far until he came to the same river that fed into Seteth's cave. It stemmed from a reservoir that was high up between the dunes. To climb the steepness of the sand, the man was sweating now. But something kept him moving, convinced that the boy had taken the same steps and found himself in trouble. By the time the Bastet came into view, Ilian was almost sure that this had nothing to do with the boy. He thought the Bastets existed to hunt for dangerous people, enemies of the state. But what could a teenager have done to activate such a distaste for the police state of Egypt? But then, as Ilian perched on top of the dunes, he saw a little head poke up out of the sand. He squinted through the night, and sure enough, he recognized Seth's face, all dirty and long, wet hair plastered with sweat and mud. The Bastet was still digging at the time, pawing against the ground where he had entered the cave. But the siren was off now. At the time the voice came through the machine. Suspect terminated. Initialized roaming sequence. The relief in Seth's body was obvious. Ilian shook his head. So the boy was in bad with the police then. Good to know. At any rate, better to know now than later. Ilian walked down to the boy, who blinked up at him, clearly in shock from what had just happened. Are you okay, boy? Ilian asked. Seteth's body shivered. Listen, he said, we have to go. That we do, Ilian said, putting his hand against Seth's back to stabilize him. They turned and walked backwards down the dunes, out of sight of the mechanical creature. Ilian didn't talk at all, respecting Seth's secrets. Even if he wanted to pry, it didn't seem like the boy was in any state right now for talk anyway. He might address it in the morning, or he might not. After all, it wasn't his place to pry. Memory. As the horses neared the iron-gated entrance to the Mesmere estate grounds, Seteth's eyes moved suspiciously back and forth between the structures that had kept him contained for the first years of his life. The main pyramid stood mountainous in the far distance, with external glass elevators that slid tirelessly up and down the sides. Across a glass tunnel bridge jutting from the face of the main fortress was a second pyramid, this one inverted with a pad on its top designed to support an airship landing. Beneath it, which had been restricted to Seteth, led to the underground and the breweries. Like an unexpected burn, a string of memories sprang into Seth's mind. The crypt, dark and metallic. The echoes of a baby screaming. His mother trying to calm him. The servants, wild-eyed, rushed them deeper and deeper. First down the elevators, then into the shaft, then further past the storage and the sharp farming equipment, then, finally, into the burial room. The tombs of his grandfather and generations before that, gold, onyx, and his grandmother's mummified cat. Flowers that had long ago decayed into pastel powders that his mother might at some point use in a potion. But then, like electricity, the memory of the tombs excited another memory, this one buried even deeper, like moving through the halls of the crypt. Seteth, for an instant, was looking through the set of eyes, both familiar and unfamiliar to him. Around him, darkness. In front of him, the slow closing of a coffin door. The golden light from the world outside, and a brief glimpse of a man's face that he'd recognized from dreams, shrunk into a sliver which disappeared suddenly. Then blackness and suffocation. Infiltration. Lord Gabriel Mesmer was sponsoring a chariot in a great race to be held within his estate. This meant he owned a team of 4 horses and, less importantly, a jockey. He was very proud of his team, but the race would decide all of that. He had 4 stallions. 2 of them were all black with white hair, one of them was brown with spots, and the other was brown without spots. The jockey was a little man named Emmett, who had a speech impediment and had never really appeared to Gabriel to be truly a man. Maybe it was his stature, or maybe it wasn't. Either way, he was good with the horses, so he was tolerated. On the day of the race, Emmett showed up at the stables looking sweaty and nervous. "Are you going to win?" Gabriel asked. "I'll try my best, my lord," Emmett said. Gabriel rolled his eyes. "A winner isn't someone who tries," he sneered. "A winner simply wins." Lord Mesmer cracked his scepter against the stone wall of the stables, and the echoes of the sound made all the horses stand at attention and paw at the hay. He walked off, leaving Emmett to think about the good advice he'd instilled. Emmett was nervous and sweaty still, but not because of the race. He was nervous because of the mission Hephaestus had given him. In his pocket was a small recording device, which he was meant to plant as deep into the Mesmer estate grounds as he could infiltrate. Hephaestus's voice echoing in his mind. "And if you fuck around, I'll have my machines mangle your mother." He remembered what the Bastet had done to poor Moonshine all too well. He started imagining his mother being flung into the sky like a rag doll. He shivered. Gabriel Mesmer was scary with his scepter and his money, but nothing as scary as that woman and the giant machines at her command. So, she was the one who controlled the Bastets. It seemed a fitting match, as both entities seemed so hellish. Emmett fingered the little recording device. It was active and vibrating. He knew it could hear his every interaction, and he was all too desperate to get rid of it. But he needed to find a way into the estate. Emmett wondered where the other servants and commoners like himself would regularly go. He could see the brewery structures in the distance, and they looked as if they went underground. He wondered if he would need a key to access those levels. Probably. First, he attended to the horses, made sure all 4 of Lord Mesmer's horses were fed and calm. Then, he took a deep breath to steady himself and started walking towards the brewery. After circling the perimeter, he found a little staircase that led underground. He waited until no one was around, then he rushed down the stairs, his footsteps echoing. He found himself in a tunnel with several doors along the walls. He tried each locked one until finally one of the doors was unlocked. He opened the door and shut it behind him. Now Emmett was in another hallway. This one was even darker, lit by dim electric torches fastened to the walls. He walked quickly, breathing heavily, trying all the door handles. Another open one. He went deeper into the maze of hallways like that, miraculously avoiding anyone else. What was more coincidental still is that he wound up finding his way upstairs again, only this time the unlocked doors led him inside the main pyramid. Exactly where Hephaestus wanted the bug to be planted. Heart racing, Emmett briskly walked past a group of servants who side-eyed him and whispered to each other. "I need to get the fuck out of here," he said to himself before remembering the sensitive device in his pocket was on and listening to him. He kept moving forward, past more servants, and even past a man in a suit with a briefcase. He was being seen by too many people. He just hoped no one would stop him. With no sense of direction and feeling more lost than ever, Emmett found himself in a stairwell and started climbing up. The stairwell was empty, and he imagined everyone who was supposed to be in this building was using the elevator. He climbed up and up, losing count in his panic. He started trying locked doors on each level until finally one opened, and the setting changed completely on the outside of that door. Emmett was now in a lavishly decorated chamber, still lit by electric torches, but these ones were purples and reds. He felt like he was in a dream. Surely this was deep enough to fit Hephaestus's needs. She had said the machine was capable of hearing very far distances, even through closed doors. The thought was chilling, but it wasn't his intention to overanalyze the situation. He just wanted to hide the thing somewhere and get back to the stables. On the far side of the chamber was a wall of beds, each adorned with transparent purple and red drapery, offering just enough privacy inside the beds that Emmett dreaded someone being in there. What was this room used for? Maybe this was the best place to plant the bug. Emmett found a vent behind one of the beds and hastened to unscrew the screws and swing it open. He put the recording device into the vent and closed the door, screwing the screws back in with his shaky fingers. "Who's there?" came a female's voice. Emmett spun around and squinted through the shadows. It's me, Emmett." He immediately regretted using his real name. Then he shook his head, embarrassed again. He wasn't a spy. He was certainly not cut out for this. Puzzled, the voice called back, "Who?" Her footsteps came closer, and Emmett was frozen with fear of being caught. "I'm the jockey. I wanted to find a more private restroom, and I got so frighteningly lost. I'm sorry." A hand came into view, pushing away a shroud of thin purple linens. Then a face followed, and Emmett's racing heart stopped beating for 3 seconds. The most beautiful woman he'd ever seen was suddenly standing in front of him. She had long, straight black hair and enormous eyes adorned with kohl. She was wearing a white wedding dress and an extravagant golden necklace. She could hear how nervous he was, and her face was an expression of confusion and concern. She scanned Emmett up and down, and he shivered. "It's okay, I get lost in here sometimes too," she said. Even her voice was beautiful. "I'm Cleopatra Mesmer, but you can call me Cleo." Emmett's heart was back to panicking. "My lady," he dropped to one knee, "I didn't mean to bother you." "I'm not bothered. As long as you keep my secret," she said playfully. "Secret? I'm not meant to be walking around in my wedding dress," she laughed. "That's why I picked a chamber where no one would be to try it on." Emmett shook his head and closed his eyes. "Again, I find myself in the worst place at the worst time. What do you think, by the way, about my dress? Is it really so vile?" Cleopatra asked. Emmett opened his eyes wide and looked at her. The dress was tight around her curves, and he was embarrassed to look at her. No, you look like a princess," Emmett stammered. Cleopatra narrowed her eyes. She paused and considered. "You don't seem to be lying." She sighed. "Of course, I would never know. Dad has everyone around here scared to tell the truth." Then she said, "Please get up, by the way. I'm not really into the whole bowing thing." "Sorry." Emmett stood up. "I'm sorry, milady." Cleopatra rolled her eyes and suddenly looked a little like her father. But then she laughed, and the scary shadow cleared as soon as it had arrived. "Will you wait while I change back into my day clothes? Then I can take you back to the stables." Emmett stuttered, "Oh, okay." She winked at him. "No peeking, all right?" He blushed. Never." She took a step backward and vanished behind the drapes. Emmett stood awkwardly for several minutes, quietly. He wondered who was listening to the conversation on the other side of the transmitter in the vent. He didn't want to think about Hephaestus listening to the beautiful woman. Suddenly, what he was doing felt even creepier, but he had to protect his mother. He was just relieved he was able to plant the transmitter before she showed up. Cleopatra came back through the curtains and said, "Okay, come with me." She was now wearing a blue dress and less gaudy, but still ornate earrings. The dark kohl around her massive eyes made them even more vibrant in the tinted light. She led him out of the room and down a hallway. She gestured to a door and said, "You needed to use the restroom, right? It's just through here." The Art of the Trade. Ilion led Seteth to the great doors of the main pyramid. They'd left the horses in the estate stables, bribing the keeper with a nice bottle of wine to give them a discount for the days they were to be spending there until after the wedding. They waited at the doors and looked up at an array of security cameras. Finally, a little window opened up, and a bored-looking attendant called out, "State your business." "Yes, I have an appointment." Ilion withdrew the ticket he'd received from the messenger and handed it through the window. "With Lord Mesmer." There was a long pause as the ticket was examined. "Oh, the wine guy," the voice from the window said. "Fine wines and lavish eatery," Ilion corrected him. "You are to be put in a room, and your wares should be ready to display to his lordship at any time. He will send for you when he is ready. Here's the directions to get there." A hand stretched outside the window and handed Ilion another piece of paper. Ilion thanked him and readjusted his backpack, which was already filled with prepared wares. He turned around and walked away from the door with Seth on his heels. Ilion examined the new piece of paper. "So we need to go this way," he said, and started walking. They made it to their lodging, a little room in a large building of like rooms, and checked in. Their room had one bed, which they would end up sharing, and just enough space to stash the things they'd brought in the wagon. "We need to go get our supplies from the stables. Seteth, do you remember how to get there?" Seth nodded and set off to get the wagon. He barely remembered the grounds. These were roads he'd walked as a 10-year-old. Still, the flashbacks were around every corner. And then, in the distance, he could see the road leading outside of the estate, where his mother had showed him the Bastet and warned him so many years ago. He was glad she had. His recent run-in with the Bastet in a cave was still fresh in his memory. Seteth walked to the stables and slowly pulled the wagon back to their little room. As they unpacked, Ilion spoke of the rich people who lived here, and Seth listened, but barely. He mostly nodded and grunted. That wasn't too irregular for him anyway. This time, his mind was on his family. His sister Cleo and his mother Eluna. He couldn't believe Cleo was getting married. He hoped it was to someone that she loved, not some arranged marriage their father had cooked up. Somehow, he had his doubts about the former. For some time, he pondered, searching for her and finding her and his mother before the ceremony. "Come live with me. You can be free too," he would say. He shook his head. Would they? Could they? After several hours of sitting around, there was a knock at the door. They gathered their samples into 2 large backpacks and followed the messenger back through the estate grounds, and this time through the large main door. All up the road to the main pyramid, Ilion looked like a wide-eyed tourist, even though he was actively trying to look cool. Seth kept his eyes to the ground mostly, afraid of the effect of all the memories were having on him. He was also worried about being recognized. They were taken inside the elevator and rode it up several stories. Then they were taken to a room with the large glass windows, slanted along the outside of the pyramid structure. The sun was shining in, and it was gorgeous. There was a large table in the center of the room and chairs around the table. "Arrange your things here, and Lord Mesmer will be in shortly." The messenger stepped out of the room. All right, this is it, kid. Ilian was excited. Seth was trembling. Try not to look so nervous, okay? This is the fun part. I'll show you how to swindle this rich asshole. Seth was unfazed. His dad was a dick, after all. Seth knew he wouldn't recognize him. Gabriel Mesmer thought Seth was dead, for one, and two, he was a man too absorbed in his own world to even pay attention to such details. They did as they were told. Seth opened the bottles, and Ilian poured a little bit of each into 5 glasses. They set up a charcuterie board. The minutes ticked into an hour. Then, finally, they heard footsteps coming from outside the elevator. And just like that, in walked Seth's father. He was tall, and his long cloak flowed out behind him as he power walked up to Ilian. Ilian bowed, and then the men shook hands. Seth stood in the background behind the table. Gabriel Mesmer's eyes shifted to his son, and for a split second, Seth thought he'd been wrong, that his dad recognized him. He felt all sorts of emotions, and a tiny part of him felt relief that he wasn't completely forgotten. But that was shattered as his father said in a cold voice, "And you? Don't you bow in the presence of your superiors?" Seth stiffened. "And how do you know I'm not a prince myself?" There was a razor silence. Ilian's face formed a dreadful expression. Gabriel Mesmer only stared over the table and his knuckles tightened around his scepter. Seth remembered the awful scepter. It was still the same one. He wanted to rip it out of the old man's hands and snap it over his knee. Suddenly, Lord Mesmer burst out laughing. It was a low and guttural display, as if even his laughter was meant to display dominance. "Is that so?" he shouted. His voice bounced off the walls. He shifted his eyes back to Ilian, who was terrified. "Your servant is a madman. Are you a madman too?" Ilian shook his head frantically. "No, sir." Lord Mesmer stopped laughing abruptly. "Well, maybe it's because it's my daughter's wedding and I'm just so fucking moved." He paused, wild-eyed. A vein was bulging in his neck. "Or perhaps it's just because I'm thirsty, that I will tolerate madness." Then he shot a look back at Seth. "But the boy should watch himself, as he knows how fast I can banish both of you without hesitation." Seth knew. He remained quiet for the rest of the meeting. Gabriel drank all 5 of the samples and said, "I'm having trouble deciding. Pour me more." Ilian reluctantly poured more of his fancy wine, and Gabriel swirled his finger until the glass was almost filled to the brim. He took the first glass and gulped it down. "Swill," he said. Ilian blinked at him. Lord Mesmer cleared his throat. "But I suppose it will have to do, as the ceremony is almost upon us." Ilian furrowed his brow. Seth could tell he was trying to hide his fury. Lord Mesmer thrusted his scepter into the stone floor, and the 2 loud cracks echoed around the room like his booming roar of fake laughter. "You will bring all your wares to the ceremony, and my servants will direct you where to set up your bar. You will pour this wine first until you run out, then this one last. Do you understand?" Ilian nodded. "My servants will pay you 1 silver piece per empty bottle. Is that clear?" "My lord, the last one is worth 1 gold piece." Gabriel Mesmer scowled. And there it is again. The madness. He shook his head and turned on his heels. He waved his hand as he walked away towards the elevator. A servant immediately materialized from the shadows and opened the door for him. "Silver it is, and any funny business at the ceremony, and you will find yourself in my dungeon." Delirium. The eagle, who was engaged to be married to Cleopatra Mesmer the following evening, wanted to kill a Bastet. He'd woken that morning from a powerful dream about his past. After his run-in with the Bastet when he was a child, he had found himself in a hospital bed. The doctors had kept him sedated and operated on his calf. One late night, he had a visitor. Hephaestus was there when he woke up. She had been leaning towards him, examining him. "Who are you?" the eagle asked. She didn't respond, but the eagle could see the thoughts in her head. That was the gift of his eye of truth. "I'm the hunter of the gods, you little prick." The eagle was scared, and he was trapped, close to paralyzed from the medicine and exhausted from the operations. He tried to get out of bed. He clumsily touched one foot to the ground, and so much pain shot through his injured leg that he grimaced and pulled both ankles up to his chest. "You're not going to do any scurrying anytime soon," Hephaestus said. "Your name is Hephaestus," the eagle said. His eye had told him. The old lady scowled. "And who told you that, child?" The eagle smirked. He'd known of Hephaestus and her Bastets for a little over a year now. On his adventures, he had encountered a funny little mechanic who had worked with Hephaestus on the Bastets. That's how he had discovered the verbal override code. That's also how he knew the Bastets were really machines designed to locate and subdue reincarnated gods like himself. "I know what I know," he said. The old lady removed her sunglasses and put her forehead almost up against the boy's. "A curious specimen indeed," she mused to herself. "What is the true weakness of the Bastets?" the eagle asked. All he needed was for Hephaestus to think it, and his eye would reveal it to him. The weakened armor in the pelvis was the only way to achieve maximum mobility, but it exposes a fragile part of the computer. The eagle had woken up from the dream feeling empowered. He could do it tonight. But he needed to be smart about it and follow the strict rules that he'd been making for himself. Stay out of range of the jump, fire at the pelvis, reload, repeat. Since his last run-in with the mechanical beast, the eagle had amassed a small armory of firearms. The choice of the evening was a pair of beautiful hand cannon pistols. Dark oak handles and matching inlays on the barrel displaying the word truth. Oh yeah, the eagle was ready. He'd told Cleo that he was headed to his bachelor party and that he would return the following day. He left on his horse and rode through the morning over the dunes. He'd been traveling, marking sightings of the Bastets. He was memorizing their patrol routes. Everything had been going according to plan. Now that he knew about the weak point and he had the firepower, he couldn't think of any reason why he couldn't take one down. As he rode, the eagle analyzed his dream. He'd learned a lot from Hephaestus that day. "Are you taking me to the prison of the gods?" he asked in his delirium. Hephaestus had put down her dark sunglasses again. "And give you away to Cerberus? Then how would I be able to experiment on you?" "Not today, little pup." It was a mistake. Hephaestus was cocky and old. Her scientist brain kept her from ignoring her own mortality. She knew that the boy would outlive her, even with all her potions and elixirs. She knew that her time for her life's work was coming to an end, and she wanted to research more now that she had a living god in her atmosphere. If she brought him to Cerberus to jail him for the rest of his life, she would lose the thing that she treasured most: information. In that, she wasn't too different from the eagle, but they were natural enemies either way. Today, the eagle had made his way back to the sand dune where he'd tangled with his first bastet all those years ago. He wanted that one. His leg had never healed all the way, and he'd carried a grudge about that. He was pissed at Hephaestus, actually, for making it her life's purpose to ruin him. But killing the cat would feel damn good, too. Bachelor party. The eagle had tied up his horse in a stable and then walked back to the dune where he knew the bastet would wander. He had hours to prepare, so he walked back and forth all over. He found a little cave mouth, and in it a stream. He'd brought his favorite pistols in holsters at each of his sides. He'd also brought 2 rifles on his horse's back. Those were good for 1 shot, then they needed to be reloaded, and he didn't know for sure if he'd have time for that. So he loaded 1 rifle and propped it in the mouth of the little cave. He found a little tree about 30 yards from the cave mouth and rested his second rifle on the trunk. That was pretty much it for cover, so he thought it would be best to stay between these 2 places. By now, he had to keep his eyes peeled. The bastet was coming. He first spotted it on the horizon, coming from the direction of the Great Pyramid. This seemed poetic in a way. He knew that once he killed the bastet, it would anger the new dynasty order enough to hunt him, this time for real. But he also knew that chipping away at that armor meant he could one day tear down the NDO itself, and that filled him with a wild sense of hope. Besides, he didn't plan on sitting around. After the wedding, he was to honeymoon with Cleopatra down the river, and she didn't know it yet, but his plan was to extend the trip until he was well out of range of the bastets. He might even tell her that he was a god. The bastet walked slowly, as if bored with the sand. It was high noon, and the sun reflected in all directions off the top of the pyramid and cast little star-like reflections off the mechanical feline body. The eagle was sitting on top of the highest dune in a meditative state. He was nervous, but more excited than anything. The beast of his nightmares was within range. It was time to repay the damage done to his body and mind and soul all those years ago. The bastet came into range, and the eagle stood up. The eyes turned red. The siren blared. The eagle smirked. He wasn't so scared this time. He held up his 2 hand cannons and steadied his breathing. He could see down the barrels, and he'd been practicing his aim for years for this moment. He took 1 more breath, fingering the triggers. Truth. He fired with his right hand. The bullet ricocheted off the tail of the cat and conjured a cloud of sand as it plunged. Left hand. Clang! He'd struck metal again. No worries. He had time. He just needed to remember to breathe. The cat shook its body like it was wet. In actuality, it was shaking off years of purposeless wandering through the same routes in the desert. The red eyes looked around, assessing the threat. Here we go. Chamber number 2. The eagle's feet were moving, but his chest was aimed at the beast, and his hands were steady. Blam! Blam! Another round from each pistol. 2 direct hits against the metal surrounding the exposed computer pieces within the pelvis. The eagle slid gracefully down the side of the dune towards the cat, anticipating the first leap. He was headed towards the tree. And the bastet did leap. It left a little mushroom cloud of sand beneath its 4 feet and rose in front of the sun, hurtling towards the god. The eagle fired 2 more puck shots at the moving target while sliding down the hill. He'd timed it right. There were 4 more shots in each of his pistols before he would have to reload. He holstered them. He'd made it to the tree before the bastet landed on the other side of the tree. The eagle closed his eyes to keep out the sand cloud, and his hands picked up his rifle and pressed it against his shoulder. The feeling was familiar. He'd been practicing. His truth eye opened and focused. This was also his shooting eye. As he fired, the cat stretched out 1 massive paw and splintered the tree just barely in front of him. The paw blocked the round, but the eagle was already on the move again. He sprinted towards the cat and then hooked right towards the cave. The cat almost appeared to be angry. The eagle could hear the heavy paws behind him thrusting down into the sand, trying to catch him. This thing wasn't so fast after all. Not if he wasn't afraid of it. At the mouth of the cave, the second rifle was waiting. The eagle grabbed it and slid into the cave. The same cave that Seth had taken refuge in a few nights ago. The eagle took the same path Seth had taken and came out the other side. As the cat frantically dug at the cave, the eagle aimed again from the outside. Still calm, still collected. His hands were steady. He fired. All at once, it was as if an electric shock had gone through the mechanical beast's spine. Its tail shot out, and it reared on its hind legs, and the siren changed from a constant howl to a lowered pitch, starting and stopping arrhythmically. The eagle let the rifle fall into the sand, and he withdrew his pistols again. 2 rounds, aimed and timed perfectly, burst into the computer within the creature. The eagle could see a flurry of sparks and smoke billowing out from within the center of the beast. The Bastet writhed in animated agony. It spun this way and that, looking for the source of the bullets. The little flames grew almost immediately, and the smoke thickened. The eagle released his final bullets into the same weak spot, blasting complex circuits and spreading the fire. The Bastet was slowing down. It continued to spin, scanning, and then finally the red light flickered and turned off. There was a screeching, gear-grinding sound. The eagle had time to reload both of his pistols, and he stood still watching the cat stumble over its own feet and then finally fall into the sand face first. Smoke rose from the twisted metal, but the artificial life had escaped. Now it was just chunks of twisted metal and circuits, all smoking and burning. The eagle smiled. He'd known he was a god for years now, but for the first time, he felt like one.